Welcome back! My name is ballerscuba. This is Video Games Over Time. We are still in 1986. Today, we're going to talk about some more honorable mentions of 1986. In 1986, Mastertronic released Agent X to the ZX Spectrum. Developed by Stephen Tatlock, John Tatlock, and Tim Fallon, Agent X is an action game. The player plays as Agent X in 4 different sections. The first has Agent X driving along a scrolling road. The next is a basic fighting game where Agent X must defeat enemies. The third is a target shooting game with objects being thrown at Agent X. The fourth has Agent X controlling a helicopter, which must be piloted through a cave complex. The game was reviewed well at the time. On July 1st, 1986, Sharp released the Twin Famicom in Japan. The Twin Famicom was designed as a combination of the Famicom and the Famicom Disk System in a single piece of hardware. Originally selling for 32,000 yen, around $550 in 2025, the Twin Famicom featured a switch below the cartridge slot to switch between the cartridge and disc formats. In 1986, Electronic Arts released Arcticfox to computers. Arcticfox was developed by Dynamics with Joey Barra producing. It was programmed by Damon Sly, Richard Hicks, Jeffrey Tunnell, and Kevin Ryan, with art by John Burton. Arcticfox is a tank simulation game. The player controls the Arcticfox super tank and must destroy the alien base in Antarctica to save the Earth. The game received mostly positive reviews from critics at the time. In 1986, First Star Software released Boulder Dash III to computers. Boulder Dash III is an action game and part of the Boulder Dash franchise. The third game has the player play as Rockford, who is now wearing a spacesuit and moves through a futuristic setting. The game was a commercial and critical failure. Also in 1986, Epyx would release the Boulder Dash construction kit to American computers. The fourth game in the Boulder Dash series, the game was developed by First Star Software. The game comes with 12 levels of its own, but the key feature was the ability for the player to create puzzles for themselves. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In July 1986, Atari would port Track and Field to the Atari 2600. This home version of the 3-year-old arcade game would not be particularly successful. In July 1986, Taito released Slap Fight to Japanese arcades. Developed by Toplin with music from Masahiro Yuge, Slap Fight is a scrolling shooter. The player plays as an Allied League of Cosmic Nations pilot, who must defeat an invading alien race led by Gaudi on planet Theron. The game proved to be popular in Japan despite few cabinets being made. In 1986, Microgen released Equinox to British computers. Programmed by Raffaele Cecco and Chris Hinsley, Equinox is an action game. The player plays as a dedicated disposal droid that must turn off a security system, then clear the area of radioactive material before time runs out. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In July 1986, Activision released Shanghai to computers. Programmed by Brody Lockard, Shanghai is a mahjong solitaire game. The player is tasked with removing all mahjong tiles, but only in pairs if the tiles have at least one vertical edge free at the beginning of the turn. The game proved to be popular, selling over 500,000 copies by 1991. In 1986, Activision released GBA Championship Basketball 2-on-2 to computers. The game was developed by Dynamics, designed by Scott Orr, with additional design from Troy Linden and John Cutter, additional art from John Cutter and Mark Madland, and music from Tommy Dunbar. GBA Championship Basketball 2-on-2 is a basketball game. The game features 2 players on each side. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On July 16, 1986, Sega released Enduro Racer to arcades. Designed by Yu Suzuki with music from Hiroshi Kawaguchi, Enduro Racer is a racing game. Based on the sport of Enduro, the game has the player control a motorcycle racer, who must ride a dirt bike through 7 stages. Of note is the player's ability to jump over obstacles and perform a wheelie. Much like Hang On, Enduro Racer came with a motion simulator arcade cabinet. The game would be popular where it was released. In 1986, Gremlin Graphics released Jack the Nipper to British computers. Featuring music by Ben Daglish, Jack the Nipper is a puzzle platform game. The player plays as Jack, a child who wants to break the record for naughtiness. He must carry out pranks while avoiding contact with angry adults, monsters, and ghosts. The game sold well and was reviewed well by critics at the time. On July 20th, 1986, the Shochiku Fuji Company released Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach to theaters in Japan. The animated film was directed by Masami Hata and written by Hideo Takayashiki, with Masakatsu Suzuki and Tsunemasa Hatano as producers. The film would star Toru Furuya as the voice of Mario, Yu Mizushima as the voice of Luigi, Mami Yamase as the voice of Princess Peach, and Akiko Wada as the voice of King Koopa. It would also feature music by Toshiyuki Komori and Koji Kondo. The film's plot starts with Mario, who is playing a Famicom at night when a woman appears on his screen and asks for help. She jumps out of the television and introduces herself as Princess Peach. King Koopa appears and follows her out of the TV. Mario fights King Koopa, but Koopa wins, captures Peach, and goes back into the TV. Mario finds that Peach has left a small necklace on the floor. Mario and his brother Luigi are working at their grocery store the next day when Luigi tells Mario that the jewel on the necklace can lead its owner to the Mushroom Kingdom, a land of treasures. However, a small dog comes into the store and takes the necklace from Mario. Mario and Luigi chase the dog and fall down a pipe. On the other side of the pipe, Mario and Luigi find a mushroom hermit, who reveals that he sent the dog named Kibidongo to bring the brothers to him. He explains that the Mushroom Kingdom is being ravaged by King Koopa's army because Princess Peach refused King Koopa's marriage proposal. Now King Koopa is turning the citizens of the Mushroom Kingdom into inanimate objects and is planning to force Princess Peach to marry him on Friday the 13th. The hermit explains that there is a legend that claims the Mario Brothers can defeat Koopa with the help of 3 mystical power-ups: the mushroom, the flower, and the star. So the Mario Brothers set out on the quest, led by Kibidongo. After a long journey, Mario and Luigi are able to get all 3 power-ups and arrive at King Koopa's castle just as the wedding is starting. Using the power-ups, Mario is able to defeat Koopa, break the spell, and restore the Mushroom Kingdom. Mario returns Peach's necklace, which returns Kibidongo to his true form, Prince Haru of the Flower Kingdom. Haru explains that he is Peach's fiancé, but Koopa transformed him to Kibidongo so that he could marry Peach instead. Mario is heartbroken, but the brothers wish the couple well and return home. In a post-credits scene, King Koopa and his minions are now working in Mario and Luigi's grocery store as punishment. Clearly inspired by the Super Mario Bros. Video game, the film would be advertised heavily in Japan. Grouper Productions, who teamed up with Nintendo to produce the film, would release Mario merchandise across Japan to promote the film, including watches, phone cards, ramen noodles, a manga, several books, and the original soundtrack. Mario was becoming very popular in Japan. In 1986, MEC released Number Munchers to American computers. Designed by R. Philip Bouchard, Number Munchers is an educational game. The player controls a muncher who must move around to munch the correct numbers while avoiding the troggles. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On July 20th, 1986, Sega released Hokuto no Ken to the Sega Mark III. Designed as an adaptation of the manga and anime of the same name, known in America as Fist of the North Star, the game would be redesigned and renamed as Black Belt when released internationally. Programmed by Yuji Naka with music by Katsuhiro Hayashi, Hokuto no Ken is a beat-em-up. The player takes control of a martial artist who must rescue his girlfriend from his rival. The game was reviewed relatively well by critics at the time. In 1986, the Atari Corporation released Star Raiders 2 to Atari computers. Programmed by Gary Stark and Bruce Pullman, Star Raiders 2 was originally designed as a tie-in game to 1984's The Last Starfighter. After the license was dropped, Star Raiders 2 continued as a space combat simulation game and sequel to Star Raiders. The game received mixed reviews from critics at the time. On July 30th, 1986, Tecmo ported Solomon's Key to the Famicom. Several changes were made to the game when it was ported. Instead of the arcade's 50 levels, the Famicom version had 64 levels in total, with the main 48 levels divided into groups of 4 based on the 12 zodiac constellations. The game will also give the player a game deviation value, or GDV, on the game over screen to give the player an idea of how well the player played. The Famicom version of Solomon's Key would sell 300,000 copies. In 1986, Microgen released 3 Weeks in Paradise to British computers. Developed by Chris Hensley, David Perry, and Nicholas Jones, 3 Weeks in Paradise is a platform game. The player plays as Wally Week, who is lost with his family on a tropical island. Wally must solve puzzles while avoiding animals and the native local tribe, the Cannibals, to build a raft and escape. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time, though modern reviews have been less kind. On August 1st, 1986, Apple discontinued the Apple Lisa. First released in 1983, the Apple Lisa was designed as the first personal computer with a graphical user interface. However, its high cost limited the success of the computer. Even after releasing a follow-up named the Apple Lisa II for roughly half the price of the original, the Apple Lisa failed to compete with the Macintosh. In 1986, Apple offered all Lisa owners the opportunity to return their computers with a payment of roughly $1,500 in exchange for a Macintosh Plus and Hard Disk 20. It is rumored that 2,700 working Lisa computers were buried in a landfill. In 1986, Durrell Software released Turbo Esprit to British computers. Developed by Mike Richardson, Turbo Esprit is a free-roaming driving game. The player must prevent a gang of drug smugglers from completing their delivery by tracking down and destroying their cars. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On August 22, 1986, Jaleco released JajaMaru no Daibouken to the Famicom. As a follow-up to Ninja JajaMaru-kun, the player controls JajaMaru, defeating evil spirits that have spread across the land. If the player can find it, the frog will return. In 1986, Case's Computer Simulations released Vulcan, the Tunisian Campaign, to British computers. Written by Robert Smith, Vulcan, the Tunisian Campaign is a war game. The player plays one of 4 scenarios in 1943 Tunisia during World War II. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On August 27, 1986, Royal Industries Corporation Limited released I Am a Teacher Super Mario Sweater to the Famicom Disk System. The concept is that players could design a sweater in the program, then send the disc to the company, who would then make the sweater for a small fee. In 1986, Elite Systems ported 1942 to computers. These versions of the 1984 arcade game by Konami would not be as successful as the original. On August 28, 1986, Bandai released Mobile Suit Z Gundam Hot Scramble to the Famicom. Hot Scramble was developed by Game Studio, with design by Masanobu Endo and Satoshi Naito, programming by Hiroshi Shimaoka and Koichi Yamamoto, and music by Neil Sedaka and Nobuyuki Onogi. Hot Scramble is a shooter based on the anime Mobile Suit Z Gundam. The player plays as a Gundam who must defeat enemies throughout space in the game's 16 levels. Hot Scramble would be popular, selling over 400,000 copies in Japan, but received mixed reviews from critics at the time. In 1986, Gauntlet was ported to computers. These versions of the game would be reviewed well by critics at the time and would sell well, particularly in the United Kingdom, where these versions would sell over 300,000 copies by 1988. On September 5th, 1986, Activision released Super Pitfall to the Famicom. Developed by Micronix, Super Pitfall is based on Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, and is sometimes considered a loose remake of the game. Much like Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, the player plays as Harry, who must travel through the mazes to find a diamond, his niece Rhonda, and his sidekick Quick Claw. However, now Harry must also find a key to release Quick Claw and a potion to save Rhonda, and then return to the starting point after completing his objectives. The game was reviewed negatively when it was released, and some consider it one of the worst Famicom games. In 1986, Commodore released the Commodore 64C. Functionally identical to the original Commodore 64, the Commodore 64C had the exterior redesigned to more closely resemble the Commodore 128. It was often bundled with its own graphical user interface-based operating system, as well as software to access Quantum Link, an online service. To go with the operating system, which was designed by GEOS, Commodore released the Commodore 1351 mouse. Similar to the mouse that came with Amiga computers, the Commodore 1351 was reviewed well by critics at the time. On September 12, 1986, Hudson Soft released Adventure Island to the Famicom and MSX computers. Featuring art by Susumu Matsushita and music by Jun Shikuma, Adventure Island is an adaptation of Sega's arcade game Wonder Boy, but with changes due to licensing issues. The player plays as Takahashi Meijin in Japanese versions of the game, Master Higgins in American versions of the game, and Master Wiggins in the United Kingdom. Whatever the character's name, the player's goal is to survive 32 stages, defeating enemies and bosses to rescue Princess Tina from the evil witch doctor. The game received mixed reviews from critics at the time. In 1986, Faster Than Light released Light Force to British computers. Designed by Greg Follis and Roy Carter of Gargoyle Games, Light Force is a shooter. The player plays as a Light Force flight craft in the Regulus system. The player's goal is to go through 5 levels, destroying aliens along the way. Light Force sold well and was reviewed well by critics at the time. On September 13, 1986, ABC began airing The Real Ghostbusters on American television. Considered a spin-off or sequel to the 1984 film Ghostbusters, The Real Ghostbusters continues the adventures of the Ghostbusters, their secretary, and their mascot Ghost, which has been given an official name in the show, Slimer. The word real had to be added due to a dispute with Filmation, who had a separate television show named The Ghostbusters, which first aired in 1975. The television show would be relatively popular and was reviewed very well by critics at the time. In 1986, Electronic Arts released Lords of Conquest to American computers. Developed by Eon Software, produced by Don Daglow, and programmed by Ted Schmeckpepper, Lords of Conquest is a strategy game. It is based on Eon's 1982 board game, Borderlands. The game can be played by anywhere between 2 and 7 players, and either with human or computer players. These players are given territory, then will produce and trade resources, conquer neighbors, and develop their territory in order to win the game. The game was reviewed relatively well by critics at the time. On September 15, 1986, Apple released the Apple IIGS, the 5th computer in the Apple II line. Developed in large part by Steve Wozniak, the Apple IIGS was drastically different from previous Apple II computers. Featuring a powerful WDC65C816 microprocessor and either 256 kilobytes or 1 megabyte of RAM, the Apple IIGS would be far more powerful than previous Apple II models. It sold for $999, almost $2,900 in 2025, but only received mixed reviews from critics at the time. In 1986, Accolade released Mean 18 to American computers. Mean 18 was developed by Microsmiths and designed by Rex Bradford with art by George Corralius. Mean 18 is a golf game. The player can play as a golfer in one of 3 real-life courses. The game uses a 3-click control system, with the first click starting the swing, the second click setting the power, and the third click setting a draw or fade. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time and would sell over 200,000 copies. On September 15, 1986, Elite Systems ported Paperboy to the ZX Spectrum. This first home version of the 1985 arcade game would be popular and was received well by critics at the time. In September 1986, Konami released WEC Le Mans to arcades. Based on the 24 Hours of Le Mans World Endurance Championship, WEC Le Mans is a racing simulation game. It features an advanced motion simulator cabinet most known for being expensive at the time, with the so-called Big Spin version spinning the player around in 360 degrees. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In 1986, Loriciel released Sapiens to the Thomson MO5, a French computer. Developed by Didier and Olivier Guillon with music from Gilles Soulet, Sapiens is an action-adventure game. The player creates a custom Neanderthal character with a gender, hairstyle, dress code, and abilities, then goes through missions in a procedurally generated open Paleolithic world in an effort to become leader of their tribe. The game was popular and was reviewed well by critics at the time. In September 1986, Sega released the Master System to the United States. The Master System is a rebranded Sega Mark III, which we talked about in a previous video. The console was sold at a price of $200, around $580 in 2025, and came with the console, a light gun, 2 controllers, and a single cartridge containing both Safari Hunt and a new port of Hang On. Upon the Master System's release, only 8 games were available for the console in North America. Those were Choplifter, Fantasy Zone, Ghost House, Hang On, My Hero, Safari Hunt, Snail Maze, and Teddy Boy Blues. It is said that Sega wanted to sell 400,000 to 750,000 consoles by the end of the year, planning to advertise the consoles heavily to increase the sales. We will check back in at the end of the year to see how that went. Around the same time, Sega would port the Master System version of Hang On back to the arcades. This version of the game, named Hang On Jr., would prove not to be nearly as popular as the original arcade version of the game. On September 18, 1986, Taito released Kiki Kaikai to Japanese arcades. Developed by Mikio Hitano with art from Toshiyuki Nishimura and Kazuya Mikata and music from Hisayoshi Ogura, Kiki Kaikai is a shoot-'em-up game. The player plays as Seo-chan, a Shinto shrine maiden in feudal Japan. The player must use her Ofuda scrolls and Gohai wand to defeat a number of creatures of Japanese mythology. The game would be successful in Japan, but modern reviews of the game have been largely negative. On September 18, 1986, Infocom released Moon Mist to American computers. Designed by Stu Galley and Jim Lawrence, Moon Mist is a text adventure game. The player plays as a young detective who must investigate a castle to see if the castle is haunted or if the character's friend is in danger. Moon Mist is believed to be the first English video game to feature a gay character. The game received mixed reviews at the time. On September 19, 1986, Namco released Super Xevious Gamp no Nazo to the Famicom. Developed with assistance from Toze, Super Xevious Gamp no Nazo is a shooter and a sequel to 1982's Xevious. The player plays as the Sovalu, who must destroy a supercomputer named General Artificial Matrix Producer, or GAMP. The game was a commercial failure and received mixed reviews from critics at the time. On September 22, 1986, Tokuma Shoten ported Ghostbusters to the Famicom. The Famicom version of the 1984 computer game would add a staircase sequence before the final boss fight. This version of the game was received poorly and is considered a failure. On September 27, 1986, Nintendo fully released the Nintendo Entertainment System across the United States. Nintendo had been testing selling the NES in key markets in the United States since late 1985, expanding from New York to Los Angeles, then Chicago and San Francisco, then another 12 markets. Finally, on September 27th, the NES was released nationwide. The NES was available in 2 different packages. Nintendo sold the deluxe set, the same sold during the New York launch, for $160, over $465 in 2025. This set included the console, 2 controllers, Rob, the Zapper light gun, and the games Gyromite and Duck Hunt. They also sold a control deck package for $99, over $285 in 2025. This included the console, 2 controllers, and a copy of Super Mario Bros. Sales for the NES went well quickly. Nintendo would aggressively advertise the console in a way that their competitors did not in 1986. By the end of 1986, Nintendo sold 1.1 million NES consoles in the United States, with the inventory of consoles being the biggest limiting factor. The NES in a matter of months became the second best-selling console in the United States, only behind the Atari 2600. Nintendo of America saw the low quality of Atari 2600 games as a major reason that the console crashed in America. So, to combat this, Nintendo of America would add an official Nintendo seal to the boxes for the NES video games. This was meant to ensure customers that Nintendo ensured that the games being released were of quality and were appropriate for customers to purchase for the NES. At the time of release, Nintendo had 27 games available in the United States for the NES. We have talked about many of these games in detail previously. However, we have failed to mention some of the game's total sales numbers in the United States. Spoiling how sales of the NES console go, let's go over the total sales numbers for those games now. Super Mario Bros. Would become the best-selling game for the console, not only because of the game's quality and popularity, but also because it would be a major pack-in game for the console. It sold over 40 million copies. Duck Hunt would become the second best-selling game for the console, also largely due to its pack-in game status. It sold over 28 million copies. Other notable sales of Famicom and NES versions of games we have covered would be Excitebike, 4.1 million copies. Golf, over 4 million copies. Kung Fu, over 3.5 million copies. Baseball, 3.2 million copies. Mario Brothers, over 2.2 million copies. Tennis, 2.1 million copies. Soccer, over 1.9 million copies. Pinball, 1.8 million copies. Ice Climber, over 1.5 million copies. Gyromite, over 1.3 million copies, mostly as a pack-in game. Hogan's Alley, over 1.2 million copies. Donkey Kong, over 1.1 million copies. Donkey Kong Jr., over 1.1 million copies. Popeye, 1.1 million copies. These are some of the highest numbers we have seen for video game sales to date. It is clear that the NES will be a console we will talk about for some time to come. We will leave the NES here for now and check back in at the end of the year. In response to the American release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, Atari released the Atari 2600 Junior in 1986. The Atari 2600 Junior is a smaller version of the Atari 2600 designed to look more like the Atari 7800. It was advertised as a budget gaming system, selling for $49.99, around $145 in 2025, with an extensive library of games already existing for the system. That will do it for the honorable mentions of 1986 for now. My name is ballerscuba. This has been Video Games Over Time! Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we try to inherit a kingdom.